It was the savage killing of a young man in broad daylight on a busy stretch of motorway, witnessed by his terrified fiancée. The killer, a high-ranking career criminal who had killed before. A stunned nation was gripped by the horrific road rage murder of Stephen Cameron as it made headline news. This was a crime that shook Britain. 21-year-old electrician Stephen Cameron was in the prime of his life. But on the 19th of May 1996, a lethal confrontation on a busy M25 motorway slip road would cost him his life.
Police are describing the attack as a case of road rage. They're appealing for witnesses to the murder, which happened earlier this afternoon on a slip road between the A20 and the M25 near Swanley in Kent.
Kent police launched a huge investigation, sparking an international manhunt to bring Stephen's killer to justice. This is the story of the brutal murder of Stephen Cameron, told from the inside through the eyewitness accounts of the family and the detective at the heart of the case. "21-year-old Stephen Cameron worked as an electrician. He was fun-loving and had a winning personality.
He was always teasing everybody. He was a very touchy-feely person. He had a way of coming up behind people and putting his arms around them and cuddling them. He always showed plenty of love.
My Stephen had a fabulous personality. His attitude to life was absolutely fantastic. He was kind, generous, funny. He was my best friend.
He was full of life, great fun to be with, just happy-go-lucky.
Stephen was in a long-term relationship with his childhood sweetheart, 17-year-old Danielle Cable. They lived together with Stephen's devoted parents, Ken and Tony, in Swanley, Kent.
Stephen met Danielle when she was at a bus stop, and this is her words to me. He looked at me, smiled at me, and I fell in love with him. And we all had our own lives, but we all were a very close family. We used to see each other all the time and do things together, go away together. We just had a perfect life. You just take it all for granted. It just seemed to us a normal, happy family life.
Stephen and myself, we used to go to golf, go and play pool. Where I worked, that's where Stephen done his training, and I used to see him every day, all day. He was always coming around, "Dad, you haven't got £5 of it, I'm going to go and have some lunch." He used to tease the life out of me. We was really, really close.
In December 1995, Stephen had planned a memorable Christmas.
Christmas Eve, he came home and he'd bought her a ring. He just showed it to me and I said, "Oh dear, she doesn't even know." And he went over and see her mum and dad that evening and they were happy about it. So it was a really lovely Christmas that we spent together. They were looking forward to getting married later on and just having a happy family life together.
Stephen and Danielle were making plans for their future.
He was starting his own business with his cousin. They were starting up an electrical business together. Him and Danielle and his best friend Darren were moving in together. They'd rented a house in Chislehurst and they had everything to look forward to. He had his life ahead of him and he was so happy.
But this happy family life would soon be shattered. Deep in the heart of the Kent countryside, just 10 miles from the Cameron family home, lived one of Britain's most notorious criminals, Kenneth James Noy. Kenny Noy was already well known to the British police and public, a notorious career criminal involved in the money laundering of the Brinks Mat stolen gold, the largest bullion robbery in British criminal history.
We knew he was a criminal. We didn't know him. We knew there was a book that had been written, The Brinks Mat Robbery, which my husband had read and Stephen also had read.
In November 1983, a highly organised South London gang of 6 armed robbers slipped into a maximum security warehouse near Heathrow and stole 3 tons of gold bullion worth a staggering £26 million. It was during the hunt for the missing gold that Kenny Noy was brought to the attention of the police. He was turning the gold into cash. But during the Brinks Mat investigation, he murdered undercover surveillance officer, Detective Constable John Fordham, in a frenzied knife attack, stabbing the officer multiple times in his chest. Sensationally acquitted on the grounds of self-defence, Noy was instead sentenced to 14 years in prison for his involvement in the conspiracy to handle stolen gold and VAT fraud. He was released early, 7 years later, in 1994.
Kenneth Noy hadn't long been out of prison. I was unashamed in the way in which he went about his life. He didn't have much shame about the fact that he'd got 14 years in prison for handling stolen goods, the gold from the Brinks Mat.
But Noy was once again about to make headline news. It was a seemingly normal Sunday morning at the Cameron family home.
Because they'd been out the night before and Stephen had been drinking.
I control myself.
That morning I had my 2 little granddaughters staying. They'd got in bed with Stephen and Danielle and was laughing and joking, and he told them that he was going to have them as his bridesmaids, and he was describing to them what sort of dresses they would have. I was up early because my mother, who lived across the road to us, wasn't very well, and she was in bed and I was going to go shopping. Stephen got up and he said, you're going to cook my breakfast, jokingly, and I said no. I said, I'm off out. And he said, oh, come on Mum, please do my breakfast. I said, no, don't be so lazy, you do it. The last thing that he did was tell me he loved me. I left with the 2 granddaughters and took them shopping.
Yeah, we had a cup of coffee together, had a little chat, because he'd been out on the Saturday night to a club.
You got to be ready in 5?
Yeah.
As Stephen and Danielle got ready, they discussed their plans for the day.
Stephen was going up to London to buy some bagels for all his friends. They were all going to a football match that afternoon to watch Danielle's brother play football.
Stephen suggested to Danielle that she drive the Bedford van.
I'm going to drive.
You'll be alright.
Danielle was driving because they'd been out the night before and Stephen had been drinking.
Danielle, never driven on a motorway in her life. She'd only just passed her test. Stephen decides that, Danielle, you can drive the vehicle, we'll go out and get some shopping. She was very reluctant to do that, but accepted that perhaps to please him she would drive it and get a motorway driving out of the way, as it were, but she wasn't very happy about it, especially a van.
It was on a Sunday, it was about 1:10. I was watching the Monaco Grand Prix. Just started the warm-up lap and Stephen went off with Danielle.
As they set off from their home to drive to London, they were unaware of the danger ahead of them. Sunday, 19th of May, 1996. Stephen Cameron and his fiancée Danielle Cable were planning to meet friends. Having been out drinking the night before, Stephen suggested that Danielle should drive his van. A reluctant Danielle agreed, and they set off from their home in Kent to travel to London on the M25.
Stephen was on the phone to his best friend Darren, who he'd known since he was about 4.5, and they were going to share the house together that week. They were moving in.
They drove down Beechenley Lane, where they lived, and turned left onto London Road, heading towards the Swanley interchange and the M25 motorway.
So she drives onto the motorway at the Swanley interchange. We think she cut somebody up or had taken someone's road. The Land Rover Discovery pulled across the front of the vehicle when they stopped at the traffic lights just prior to joining the motorway.
Outraged by this late lane change, the motorist stormed out of his Land Rover and approached the van. Stephen and Danielle had never seen him before. It was convicted criminal Kenny Noy.
Danielle is in a dreadful state at the driver's wheel of this rascal van.
Terrified, Danielle had no idea why her driving had just triggered such a tirade of abuse from the other motorist. Stephen stepped out of the van and approached the raging driver.
Stephen wasn't even driving. He was just protecting his fiancée, which any man would do.
Stephen Cameron came face to face with Kenny Noy.
What he didn't know at the time, of course, was that the one person that he picked this gesticulation with was Kenneth Noy, a known criminal.
They quickly became embroiled in a heated exchange of words.
There is a confrontation between Stephen and Kenneth Noy at the front of the rascal van, of which Danielle saw the lot.
But the disagreement soon turned to physical violence.
The first punch would appear to have been thrown by Kenneth Noy.
Stop it!
Stephen instinctively defended himself.
But whatever happened, Kenneth Noy was getting the worst of the confrontation that effectively he'd chosen to have.
In a desperate bid to help her fiancé, Danielle frantically tried flagging down other motorists. Over 30 vehicles passed, but no one stopped to help. But it soon appeared that a younger, bigger and stronger Stephen had managed to defeat Noy.
Instead of leaving, instead of just going, he goes back to his vehicle, to the passenger side, and comes back as Stephen's coming back into the rascal van with what we now know is a knife. Danielle is screaming at Stephen, he's got a knife, Steve.
Stephen turned away to walk away, and the man went back and got a knife.
And the next thing you know, he's stabbed by Kenneth Noy, fatally in the heart.
Noy twice plunged the knife into Stephen's body, puncturing his heart and liver. With the knife still in his hand, Kenny Noy got back into his vehicle and drove off at speed. Stephen had collapsed in Danielle's arms, covered in blood.
The only person who had the presence of mind to think about getting the registration number of the Land Rover Discovery was indeed Stephen.
With Stephen dying in her arms, a distressed Danielle phoned for an ambulance and then quickly called Ken Cameron.
Ken.
When Danielle phoned me, I just went into total panic mode.
Stay calm. Stay there.
I don't even remember driving to the roundabout. I just got in the car and went. Just got there and I see Danielle and she was as white as a sheet. She was really, really white, pale, and she was shaking like a leaf. So I sat her in the car and I went over to Stephen and
Within minutes, paramedics arrived on the scene, but they were too late.
I just looked at him and just knew he was dead. He was as white as anything, and I just knew he was dead, and they knew he was dead. That's an image that's actually burnt into my head. I can still see him laying there. I was numb. My body just felt totally numb. If anyone had said to me, if you were to see your son lying in the road and you knew he was dead, how would you react? I'd have said I'd have gone hysterical. I was as calm as anything. I suppose something just takes over, doesn't it? The adrenaline just takes over.
What's his name? Stephen. Stephen. Stephen.
Ken drove back home to tell Tony.
Just as I'd got home, he rushed out the house and said to me, just get in the car. And I see Danielle was sitting in the front, so I got in the back with the two girls, not knowing what it was. And I always remember looking at Danielle, and she was staring straight ahead. Her face was as white as snow. And I knew by my husband's panic that something was wrong. And I remember my husband was driving frantically, and he said to me, Stephen's been stabbed. I just felt my heart was going to come out of my chest. It was just thumping and thumping, and I just couldn't understand, what was going on. I remember phoning my son. I was panicking, and I thought, I've got to phone the two little girls' mum to tell them to meet us at the hospital, because I didn't want them to be there.
Danielle just sat there as quiet as anything. He's never said a word.
We went into a small room and we all stood there just waiting for news.
I knew Stephen was dead, but I couldn't tell her. I just couldn't tell her.
The doctor came in and he told us that they couldn't save our Stephen. He'd died. I couldn't speak, I couldn't do anything. I just remember feeling numb. Everything was so normal that morning, and something like that just didn't seem real. And I couldn't believe that my Stephen could have died. I just wanted to be with him, and they did allow us to go and see him. And I remember holding his hand, and I don't know how I felt. I just felt numb. I still can't believe that it was him laying there. I can't think how my husband must have felt, because he actually saw him. I was spared that, but I wish I'd have been with him though, because it'd be nice as a mother to be with him at that time.
But the one thing I always stuck in my mind, I could never remember seeing any blood. I could never remember seeing any blood at all. And he must have been covered in blood, quite truthful. Don't remember, it must be blanked out.
When your child leaves the house, you wave them goodbye, but you never think you're not going to see them again.
A man's been stabbed to death after an argument with another driver. Police are describing the attack
Stephen
as a
Cameron
case of
from
road
Swanley was killed in front of his girlfriend during an argument on a motorway slip road.
Danielle, whose surname isn't being released by the police, had been engaged to Stephen for 6 months.
The shocking headlines the following day horrified the nation. There was stunned disbelief that a motorist could kill another over an argument about their driving. Kent police quickly mounted Operation Quern to hunt down Stephen's killer.
It was one of the biggest criminal investigations in terms of resources for the Kent Police that we've ever had. We had something like in excess of 30 witnesses who had been using the motorway, that junction, at the time, and each of them saw different parts of what happened. Danielle, of course, saw everything that happened.
He was driving a Land Rover when I came up.
Out of all the witnesses that we had that saw, if not all the incident, but part of the incident, none of them got the whole registration number. None of them.
With no vehicle registration number, Kent Police were struggling to identify the killer. Had Kenny Noy managed to get away with the stabbing? Electrician Stephen Cameron was in the prime of his life until he was fatally stabbed during a road rage incident on a busy motorway slip road. His dying words to his fiancée were to note down his killer's number plate. Kenny Noy, a notorious criminal, had fled the crime scene.
There was someone out there that had stabbed Stephen and I wanted them caught.
Although we had witnesses who could say what happened, nobody identified the person, no one knew who he was, and we were in a very difficult position because we didn't have any forensic evidence that would link a suspect to the scene. There is a CCTV camera at that junction, and on that particular day, the 19th of May, it was not working.
With no forensic evidence and no CCTV, Kent Police were struggling to identify the M25 killer.
The man disappeared in what we knew was an L-registered Land Rover Discovery. Difficulty you had was, of course, we didn't have the entire registration number. The police national computer showed 18,000 plus L-registered Land Rover Discoveries, and they're only the legitimate ones that were registered in the UK. But when you spoke to the witnesses, we had about 5 different colours. The colours ranged from green to maroon to blue to grey to black. Very soon we realised that we were going to find it very difficult to find that particular vehicle. If you don't have that significant lead for a named person within the first 48, 72 hours, you know it's going to be an uphill task.
Two months after he was stabbed, the funeral of Stephen Cameron took place at St Mary's Church in Swanley. Friends and family gathered to pay their respects and say their final goodbye.
We had a house full of people and we both felt lonely. Well, you just try and keep yourself going, trying to be strong. I was trying to be strong for Tony. Tony was trying to be strong for us, for me. But you just go through the motions of life, don't you?
At the time, you're numb. I was doing things, don't remember what I was doing. It was as though I was standing up on the ceiling looking down at everybody.
After Stephen died, I tried to get on with my life the best I could. It was very, very difficult. I just couldn't work anymore. I needed a nervous breakdown. I just couldn't face going to work. I couldn't cope with work. If it hadn't been for Tony, I don't know what I would have done because she was an absolute brick.
The grieving family's focus turned once more to the police investigation and finding the M25 killer.
There was lots of points where you think that he isn't going to get caught, he isn't going to get found. And that was the worst part, not knowing where he was. We wanted him caught. For Stephen's sake, we would have gone to the ends of the world for that to happen.
I did start to question if they would actually catch him in my own mind. I used to phone up Nick Biddis, the superintendent, and beat him up every week on the phone. I used to give him a hard time.
There is always a pressure for us to solve such dreadful crimes. There's pressures both from the police, as it were, the public, the media, and especially the family. I mean, Danielle's lost a fiancé. Ken and Tony, of course, they've lost a son.
A heartbroken Danielle was their key witness, and Kent police desperately needed her to help solve the murder.
And what did Stephen do? Danielle was extremely cooperative and wanted justice for Stephen and the family. She was always available for me to interview her or to get some information if there was anything, and I always kept regular contact with her, with Ken and Tony Cameron.
So when the man hit him, that must have just made him really angry.
Danielle's emotions gave me the strength because I knew I had to help her. It was a sort of a motherly instinct, if you like, and I felt I had to be strong for her.
He was just trying to diffuse.
To see someone you love stabbed to death and die in your arms, especially because she was so young and she was so hurt by it all.
Danielle provided the police with a description of the vehicle and Stephen's killer, whilst intelligence was beginning to shed some light on the identity of the Land Rover owner.
There was information that came in relation to local criminals, which is not unusual in a murder inquiry. Kenneth Noy was the sort of guy that wouldn't hide away and would be part of his local community, be seen. It was suggested to us that he disappeared.
This key piece of intelligence shocked those involved.
I couldn't imagine anyone that would have gone back and got a knife, so I obviously thought it was some sort of villain to do something like that and to do it and run and not show any remorse. It might be road rage, but to me it was murder.
We were extremely surprised to think that somebody of Kenneth Noy's professional criminal standard would get involved in such a crime. But of course he's disappeared, so we need to look at it.
We never for a moment imagined that he would have been there to have murdered Stephen. It was 1,000,000 to 1 chance that he would meet such a criminal.
I didn't believe it. First off, I just could not believe it. A person with his stature in the criminal world at 1:20 on a Sunday afternoon would do such a stupid thing in broad daylight in front of loads of people. Because he's a person who's well known in the area. I just didn't believe it.
But Kenny Noy had realised the enormity of his crime. After stabbing Stephen Cameron to death, Kenneth Noy raced back to his home, where he made a number of frantic calls, packed a suitcase with cash, and left.
Within 24 hours of the murder, his phone went dead. His mobile phone went dead. And of course, we had no means of finding out what communication he may have been using. Clearly he was using something, but we didn't have any way of monitoring it. We obviously searched his house. His associates and friends and his family claimed they hadn't seen him or he'd gone. I don't know where he was, but he'd had nothing to do with such a crime. Nobody would tell us anything. Nobody knew anything. Hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. He just disappeared off the face of the earth.
With the help of his underworld contacts, Noy was whisked across the channel by helicopter, fleeing the country.
We knew he had a criminal background. He had friends in the criminal world that would help him to stay away, and we knew he would have all these things to help him.
He was desperate to cover his tracks and raise as little suspicion as possible.
We then soon realised that Kenneth Noy not only had disappeared, but the Land Rover Discovery that he had been driving has disappeared. There was another, what we called a doppelganger vehicle, had been stuck on his driveway. This vehicle, which looked exactly the same colour and type of the one that we were looking for, was bought for cash. And that vehicle landed up on Kenneth Noye's driveway. I think it was put there so as if anybody was casually passing by to say that, you know, Kenneth Noye's disappeared, but his vehicle's still on his driveway.
Very quickly, the press discovered the identity of the prime suspect and took a renewed interest in the story.
The press found out that we were looking to try and find Kenneth Noye, who was well known in media circles, and therefore it was a good story. Sells papers.
You guys, I'm going to put you in charge of dealing with all the witnesses. Your work is mine.
I think the police knew or thought it was Kenneth Noye for about 2 weeks after Stephen died. And they were just looking for him. But I don't think they wanted it broadcast.
I didn't really want his name mentioned at all, because I knew that it could potentially harm any fair trial. No matter who the defendant is, they're entitled to a fair trial. And the next thing you know, it's on the Sunday papers, pictures, everything. Kent Police are after Kenneth Noye in relation to the M25 murders. Does anybody know where he is?
I found out Noye was the chief suspect when I bought the News of the World one Sunday morning, in which they was totally outrageous. They shouldn't have done that.
I suppose what I could say was it could have been as a result of the public knowing that, of course, made people aware and kept it in the minds of the public, kept the story and the case going.
The story was generating huge amounts of interest. Reported sightings of Noye started coming in.
We had sightings of Kenneth Noye, or people who thought they'd seen Kenneth Noye, from all over the world. We went from Russia to Brazil, he'd gone to South America to have his face changed. Kenneth Noye is dead, definitely dead. I said, unless I see his dead body and I have his fingerprints off it, I won't believe it. But there were sightings all over the place. I'm surprised he wasn't seen on the moon.
2 years into the murder investigation, Kent Police finally got a major breakthrough. They received reports that Noye was residing in Spain.
Noye kept a very low profile and, of course, changed his identity with a new passport in the name of Green. His lifestyle was one where he was living in a very remote house. He would be drinking in bars. He was keeping himself to himself, but clearly wasn't a hermit.
The police needed to confirm that the sightings were indeed that of Kenneth James Noye. But media intrusion into the investigation was making things difficult.
The problem I had was the minute I sent any officers abroad, it would only be 24, most 48 hours before the press found out. Eventually, I ran it as a secret inquiry. I sent the officers out there with the remit, all I need you to do is to go out there and see if you can see this guy and tell me whether it's Kenneth Noye. Don't forget that in 1984, Kenneth Noye had killed a police officer in the grounds of his house at West Kingsdown, and I've sent 2 officers out with absolutely no backup to a foreign country to see if they can find this man and identify him.
With their mission outlined, the undercover surveillance officers tracked Noye down to a bar.
Those officers actually knew Kenneth Noye because of obviously his previous convictions, and they gave me a positive response. It's definitely him.
It was a big major breakthrough, but it was sort of opening wounds up, because 2 years on we were you know, settling down a little bit.
But bringing Kenneth Noy to justice was by no means a straightforward feat.
We still hadn't got either any forensic evidence or anybody actually identifying Kenneth Noy as the person who stabbed Stephen Cameron. But the bottom line was that in order to link him with the crime on the 19th of May, I needed Danielle to identify him.
She actually was the only one that actually looked him in the eyes and saw him that day.
It was now up to Danielle to bring Stephen's killer to justice. But 2 years after the stabbing, would Danielle be able to positively identify her fiancé's killer? After fatally stabbing Stephen Cameron on a busy motorway slip road, notorious criminal Kenny Noy fled the country. It sparked an international manhunt to bring him to justice. Having finally located Noy in Spain, Kent police now needed to positively identify him as Stephen's killer. There was only one person who was capable of doing that, the only person who witnessed the entire murder, Stephen's fiancée, Danielle Cable.
The identification out in Spain was, in my view, the most significant point of the whole investigation. Clearly, if she didn't identify the person out there, who we knew was Kenneth Noy, as the person who had killed her fiancé, Stephen Cameron, then the whole case in terms of Kenneth Noy would have fallen apart. And I kept regular contact with Danielle, told her that at some stage, Danielle, it may be that you have to go somewhere outside this country and you may have to try and identify the person responsible.
When the police came round to see us and inform us that Danielle had actually been taken away on a plane to identify the suspect, it came as a shock because we had no idea that they were that close to catching him.
He didn't tell us where. He just said, Danielle was on the plane as I speak to you at the moment. We think we found him. I was elated. Cried my eyes out.
Oh, I was really concerned. I was really worried about her because I knew she would be upset. I knew she'd be frightened.
Of course, there were dangers in doing that. There were dangers for her welfare, so much so that when we eventually decided that she'd have to go out there to do this, I decided to do it in as public an area as possible. What we were trying to avoid was, if you like, a one-to-one situation. Fortunately for us, we went out to a restaurant where it was absolutely packed. Danielle was able to look through a window and she was positive in that identification.
Nick Bidis phoned us and said, we've got him, she's ID'd him, it's him. And we were just, you know, so relieved.
It's about 2 years after Stephen died, which was an eternity, but they actually found him.
We were then able, as a result of that identification, to obtain a warrant for his arrest in the UK.
Within 24 hours, Kent police were granted a warrant for Kenny Noy's arrest.
Kenneth Noy was a creature of habit, and he was a person who frequented much the same bars in the Barbat area, and he was located in the particular bar where he was sitting outside on the seafront, and he was accompanied by a young lady. The Spanish authorities were actually fully briefed as to Kenneth Noy's previous convictions and his previous history as regards his violence towards officers, and they, I can assure you, took no chances when it came to arresting him. He was very quickly grabbed, immobilised, handcuffed and taken into custody.
With Noy arrested, the process for his extradition back to the UK began, a lengthy process that would take a year to complete.
It was for the British courts to decide whether it was being dealt with in accordance with the law, and they granted it, and he was duly extradited 3 years almost to the day that the crime had been committed. Initially, he claimed he had nothing to do whatsoever with the incident on the M25 on the 19th of May and knew nothing about the murder of Stephen Cameron, and that the British police were after him because of him being acquitted of murder of a police officer. That was his claim.
That is the problem. That is the problem with everything that happened last time.
Once he was brought back to the country, he then accepted that it was indeed him that had killed Stephen Cameron on the 19th of May, but that it was in self-defence.
The guy actually attacked me. That's what you've got to understand. He attacked me.
He had to hold his hands up. Yes, I was there, it was me, but it was self-defence. It was never self-defence. Stephen wasn't carrying a knife, he was the one carrying a knife.
"4 years after killing Stephen Cameron, Kenneth Noye stood trial at the Old Bailey. He pleaded not guilty.
It's very important to go to the trial and see him face the music and see justice done.
The first time I saw Kenneth Noye in court, I wanted him to be dead for killing my son.
Stabbing him twice, he intended to kill him, and I just wanted justice for Stephen. That's all I've ever wanted.
When he gave evidence at court, he said that he believed he had to leave the scene, leave the country, because the police would make sure that he got convicted of a crime he never committed, and therefore he wasn't going to hang around and wait to be arrested.
He was trying to make out that Stephen was the violent person, that it was in self-defence. He even said in court that he thought Stephen was going to throw him over the bridge and all sorts of silly things he came out with.
He was a maniac, he was a psychopath. What could I do?
But it was Danielle's witness statement that would be of crucial importance.
The key part to this case, and the one that linked it all together, was the identification of Kenneth Noye by Danielle Cable. Forensically, there was nothing there, and unless we had somebody who could identify the person who stuck the knife into Stephen, then we would never have got a conviction.
Part of his defence was that he had been identified unlawfully by Danielle. It was proven that it wasn't. Danielle was a key witness, and the one thing she always said was that his eyes, evil eyes, and that's what she see when she went out to Spain and see him, his evil eyes. That's when she knew it was him.
I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment.
Kenneth Noye was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Stephen Cameron. He would have to serve a minimum term of 16 years before he could be considered for parole.
At the time, I felt elated that he'd been found guilty, but I felt deflated that life didn't mean life, because he got 16 years. To me, he should never come out. He doesn't deserve to be out. He showed no remorse. I feel that Stephen got justice because we caught the person that did it, but I don't feel that there's justice, the fact that he's going to one day walk free and have some sort of life.
Me personally, I think the law now should be that anyone who carries a knife, is caught carrying a knife, should be put in prison. It's treated totally different to gun crimes, which I think people die with knives and people die with guns. Why is it treated totally different to gun crimes?
I don't know where she is now. I don't know what her identity is, and neither do I need to know. All I want to make sure is that she can get on and lead the rest of her life in a happy way and a content way.
We haven't seen Danielle since 1998, and we absolutely loved Danielle. She was a wonderful little girl. She really was a wonderful little girl, and we both miss her.
She was a very brave girl to have done what she did, because she could have easily turned around and said, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to get involved in it because it's likely to be a problem. But I think she's a very brave girl and should be given all credit for that.
Stephen would have been a fantastic father, absolutely fantastic father. We'd have had fantastic grandchildren with him, which we've been totally denied by an evil man.
You live your life, but you're not happy. Inside, your heart's broken. No one can mend that.
Our son Michael can't even talk about Stephen. He can't face that his brother's dead. You know, but yeah, everyone's got on with their life, which, you know, we've had to get on with our life. You have to, don't you? Life goes on. But you don't stop mourning, you don't stop missing Stephen. I miss him every day, all day.
In the dead of the night on the 7th of August 1985, 5 members of the same family were brutally murdered in their farmhouse.
It was a shocking crime in an area where there was very little or no crime.
2 6-year-old boys and 3 adults were shot dead in cold blood.
It was just ridiculously big, the story. It was just almost crazy.
Officers believed Sheila Caffell had killed her family and then turned the gun on herself. But the twist that followed thrust this horrific crime into the headlines and turned the focus to her brother, Jeremy Bamber, a name that has gone down in the annals of British crime history.
I don't think Britain had heard of a twist like it.
And the twist continues. Is the right person behind bars? We look at vital new evidence that opens this case once more and makes this a crime that shook Britain. .36 a.m. Chelmsford police in Essex receive a call from a local farmer, Jeremy Bamber, worried for his family's welfare.
Jeremy Bamber had apparently received a phone call from his adoptive father to say that his sister, Sheila, had gone berserk in the house.
You've got to come quickly. Dad?
And had a gun.
Dad!
Jeremy Bamber tried to call back. He could not get through. In his state of anxiety, he wasn't sure, and who would be sure, whether it was engaged or off the hook or whatever, but he couldn't get through. Jeremy phoned the local police station and was advised to go to White House Farm, where he would find police officers waiting for him.
The police rushed to the scene, and I think they spent quite a bit of time waiting outside, as you would do if there's been a report of gunshots.
Jeremy Bamber worked at his parents' farm, but lived just 3 miles away in Goldhanger. He arrived at the scene just minutes after the police.
A conversation started. The police officers wanted to know about the house, who's in it, and what might be behind the phone call.
Bamber explained he had left the farm after work the previous evening. Officers decided not to enter until armed backup was at the scene.
Police reinforcements were called and they were briefed. They were told there was a siege situation.
Jeremy was asked to sketch a plan of the house for the firearms team. From the conversation with his father, it appeared Sheila, his sister, was threatening the family with a gun. At 7:35 a.m., almost 4 hours after police initially arrived, armed officers entered the sprawling 18th century farmhouse to be faced with a devastating scene.
The father, Neville Bamber, was in the kitchen. He'd been shot there. The twins were in their beds. One certainly had been shot through the head and was still sucking his thumb. We had June out of her bed in the bedroom, and Sheila, the adopted daughter, laying there with a rifle, laying across her body with an open Bible alongside her.
Sheila Caffel, her twin sons Nicholas and Daniel, and her parents, Neville and June Bamber, had been brutally murdered. Shot numerous times in cold blood. The only immediate surviving relative remained outside, Jeremy Bamber.
Sergeant Jones and DC Clark's job was, in that first instance, family welfare.
Jeremy had been warned to expect the worst.
We've been all around the place. 5 fatalities.
He had been driven back from, if you like, the frontline operations and was some hundreds of yards back. When the story was broken to him, he broke down and he cried, and he was in a state of traumatic shock.
As 24-year-old Jeremy reeled from the devastation of losing his entire family, the crime scene suggested there was no one else involved.
Police elicited that Sheila, suffering with mental illness, a few days before had come out of a hospital, farmer's daughter, could handle a firearm. Jeremy Bamber, he'd been shooting rabbits and had left the gun with ammunition and a fully loaded magazine on the kitchen table. So everything was slotting into place to set the scene of her going berserk, having access to a gun, picking it up, and then shooting everybody, and then shooting herself.
There was no doubt in the minds of the majority of the senior police officers that they were dealing with a case of 1 suicide and 4 murders. Sheila Caffel was diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. She had a history of mental illness.
A tragic young woman with severe mental illness had repeatedly shot both her children and parents. News quickly spread through the small village, and the national media descended to cover the story.
The massacre at White House Farm, it was stated that Sheila Caffel's injuries appeared to be self-inflicted.
I was chief reporter on the Evening Gazette at the time of the killings. The policeman said, well, yeah, what's happened is 5 people have been found murdered in a farmhouse. You might get 1 murder in a year in the Colchester area, and that would be a big deal. But to have so many deaths reported like that, he just couldn't quite take it in, I don't think.
The Bamber family were respected members of the community.
Neville and June Bamber were very well known in the area. He was a local gentleman farmer. She very active in the local church. In addition, Neville was a local magistrate on the Whittam bench.
They lived in a very, very nice house worth quite a lot of money. You'd look at them and suspect they appeared sort of salt of the earth, but clearly the same didn't apply to their 2 adopted children.
Jeremy and his older sister, Sheila, had very different reputations to their parents.
Sheila embarked on a career in modelling. Initially, she made some progress, and she did a fair amount. But that seemed to suddenly fizzle out.
Jeremy was a good-looking lad, and I think we soon found out that he had a very lively social life. It didn't take long to find out that he liked being out in the town in Colchester, and I think he was a bit of a ladies' man.
Sheila and Jeremy wanted a greater freedom than their mother was prepared to condone. And I think that is where the trouble started.
Friction within the Bamber family soon emerged, but officers needed to delve deeper to uncover a motive behind this horrific crime. Meanwhile, Jeremy, the only surviving close relative, was taken home to deal with his loss and piece together events leading up to the murders. Officers learnt that the previous day, Jeremy and his father had worked the land, whilst June took Sheila and the boys into the local village.
Jeremy and Neville came back from harvesting. There was some sort of family supper, and they all sat round the kitchen table. And it was that point, according to Jeremy, that the conversation happened. And one element of that was suggesting that Sheila could not quite cope with her children.
Sheila Cathell had a history of mental illness and was taking prescribed medication. She had split from her husband and was visiting her parents. Her recent state of mind had given Neville and June cause for concern.
It soon became clear that Sheila was a very strange and troubled young woman. It was revealed that she believed her sons were the spawn of the devil. She's schizophrenic, and she had a lot of issues with religion, which probably stemmed from her mother.
Jeremy says that there was tension, quite considerable tension, when he went.
After the heated discussion, Jeremy left White House Farm. It was 9:30 p.m. 6 hours later, he received a call from his father.
Hello? You've got to come quickly. Dad?
The sleepy village of Tolsunt Darcy in Essex has been the scene of horrific multiple murders. 3 generations of a family have been shot and killed, including 2 6-year-old boys. Only one close family member remains, the son, Jeremy Bamber.
The police believed there was a siege situation at White House Farm, and that was why the reinforcements were called. It is also why 2 ambulances were called.
Officers waited outside the property for 4 hours before sending armed response into the farm. From the scene that confronted them, they quickly concluded that Sheila Cathell had murdered her family before killing herself. Detective Inspector Miller arrived after the bodies had been discovered.
When I got there, I was quite amazed to find a lot of press people there, and that a press announcement had already been made saying that this woman had killed all of her family. That's as much as I knew, and I was instructed to clear things up at the house and prepare a file for the coroner.
Just hours after finding the bodies, police took the decision to remove certain items from the house. Crucial evidence was taken and destroyed as officers believed the case was closed.
Within 24 hours, there was a general clean-out of White House Farm. And a fair amount was removed, in particular carpets. And one does wonder why, but they were taken out and they were destroyed before any real forensic evidence could be taken from them.
The carpets, which would be heavily bloodstained, were burned in the grounds of the farm.
In the immediate aftermath, Jeremy agreed to officers destroying some items from the farm to remove painful memories.
It was nothing like as secure as we would have been nowadays for what was a murder scene, where we were still looking for somebody else. That would have been contained obviously a lot better, but the instruction had gone out that it wasn't such a scene and that it got not such an in-depth forensic examination.
As forensic evidence wasn't a priority, the keys to White House Farm were handed to Jeremy and the extended family just 3 days later.
The relations of the Bambers, one particular woman, Anne Eaton, I think was a cousin, She had come to the farm to do an inventory with the family solicitors.
Jeremy Bamber's cousins, Anne Eaton and David Buflower, and Uncle Robert Buflower, were also farmers who lived nearby. They were keen to safeguard the property in the aftermath of the tragedy.
There's sort of a bit of a Miss Marple thing going on there, and they obviously went into the house and had their suspicions.
The Eatons and the Buflowers made a point of thoroughly searching the farmhouse. What happened next turned the case upside down.
And it was shortly prior to the coroner's hearing that a surprising development happened.
And they say in the gun cupboard in that downstairs office they found the silencer and other materials.
This silencer would fit and would be used with the rifle that we found on the body of Sheila Caffell. And Anne Eaton found it strange that the silencer was not on the gun when we found it, because there was no silencer on the gun when we found it.
The weapon that lay with Sheila Caffell was a .22 caliber rifle, a gun used by the family for shooting rabbits. It was able to accommodate a silencer or sound moderator, like the one discovered in the gun cupboard.
Once you got out the box, on it seemed like some red paint or blood, or both, and a grey hair coming out of it that had sort of attached itself to it.
The family was convinced these items were connected to the murders, so made the decision to remove them from White House Farm. 2 days later, police collected the items the cousins had discovered.
We were fortunate as an investigating team that Anne Eaton, who was familiar with the house, was able to find that silencer and deliver it to us. Because had we not got that, I'm not so sure that we would have ever had the conversation with Anne Eaton about the rifle that we found not having a silencer on it.
This discovery by Anne Eaton and her family changed the whole investigation. Officers said the gun found on Sheila Caffell did not have a silencer on it. If they proved otherwise, she could not have committed the crime.
She rang Stone Jones and he went over and collected it and brought it straight over to me, rang me and said, "Can I come and see you? I've got this silencer."
Detective Inspector Bob Miller took possession of the device and sent it for forensic examination.
Mildly excited, I have to say, when I saw it, but keeping an open mind and always looking at the negative side of things. Said, well, it could be blood from a rabbit, the hair could be from a rabbit, it could be where the rabbit's only injured and they've actually gone up close to it to put it out of its misery. But we will send it to the forensic laboratory at Huntingdon for them to carry out a proper examination of it.
Just a day later, police were called to the farm once more. This time, the cousins had discovered a scratch on the mantelpiece in the kitchen.
The relatives of Jeremy Bamber had told the police that they discovered this mark and that it was related to a silencer that they'd also found in the farmhouse.
Jeremy's cousins believed red flecks on the silencer could have been the result of a violent struggle in the kitchen, where the gun came into contact with the mantel. Whilst this was examined, results on red particles in the silencer were reported back.
The result came back with the fact that it was human blood on the silencer, inside the silencer, but not inside the rifle.
This was a major turning point in the case. If traces of human blood were found, it suggested the device had to have been used for something other than killing animals. And the lab reports went even further.
The blood inside the silencer was Sheila Caffell. I'm not so sure if the laboratory were 100% that it wasn't also a mixture of June and Neville's blood. But either way, it was certainly Sheila Caffell's.
Forensics had found the enzyme AK1 in the particles and attributed it to Sheila Caffell. If her blood was on the silencer, police believed the whole case was different to what they originally thought.
The silencer had to be on the rifle at the time when the shootings took place. Whoever did it must have removed the silencer, put it back in the box, put it back in the cupboard. Now this, of course, put a whole different complexion on the inquiry, because with the silencer fixed onto the rifle, laying across her body, had she shot herself, the gun now was too long for her to get a hand down to pull the trigger. To be resting under her chin. Couldn't be done. Impossible.
Police were originally convinced they were dealing with a murder-suicide. Now, a very different picture was being painted. As some officers investigated this new line of inquiry, the official verdict remained. Just 9 days after the shootings, the bodies were released, and Jeremy Bamber laid some of his family to rest.
He was inconsolable. He had his girlfriend Julie Mugford by his side and Colin Caffell, Sheila's estranged husband, by his other side, and it was like something out of a movie. I remember looking at the photographs thinking there was a real power about the pictures. He did appear to be genuinely devastated.
As the images of a broken family stunned the nation, officers continued with their inquiries and were soon to be rocked by yet another revelation.
Jeremy Bamber's girlfriend at the time was a school teacher, Julie Mugford.
She lived in Goldhanger, or stayed in Goldhanger with him. There were other girls around, and Jeremy enjoyed life, as he would say perhaps at the time.
He said in the past that he wanted to kill them.
It appears that early discussions with her, Jeremy suggested he was going to carry out the murders himself.
Police in Essex have reopened their investigation into the deaths of a family of 5 last month.
Jeremy Bamber's immediate family have been brutally murdered in a violent attack at their farmhouse. Police believe Sheila Caffell, his sister, who suffers with schizophrenia, has killed her parents and sons before turning the gun on herself. But as Jeremy buries his loved ones and tries to cope with the grief, a sensational twist throws the whole case into turmoil.
Jeremy Bamber's girlfriend at the time of the tragedies said he discussed ways of getting rid of the family, but I think the turning point for her not only was her conscience getting the better of her, and she felt she had to come and unburden it to us, but I think she'd overheard him talking to an old flame on the phone at the time that they were going out together, and felt a bit as though she was the jilted lover, as it were. And I think that certainly helped to be the turning point, which at the end of the day was in the favour of the investigation.
Their relationship had changed, and perhaps it wasn't quite what she hoped it was, so it appears that was the catalyst for her going to the police to make sensational allegations about him being behind the murders.
Today was the day he was going to do it.
Initially, I believe she said that he'd told her, "Tonight's the night."
This startling revelation, along with the blood results from the silencer, gave the police 2 strong indications that Sheila Caffell may not have killed her family. Their attention quickly turned to Jeremy Bamber.
The only person with any motive to kill all of that family, not rob the house, not burglarise the house, just to go in and kill a complete family, the only motive could have been the inheritance. And the only people that stood to inherit was Sheila Caffell and Jeremy Bamber. With Sheila Caffell out of the way, the only inheritor would be Jeremy Bamber.
Bamber was privately educated and well known in the area for his adventurous lifestyle. Having travelled the world after leaving college, he eventually settled down to work full-time in the family businesses, White House Farm and a nearby caravan park. Bamber's girlfriend at the time, Julie Mugford, claimed he had hired a hitman to carry out the murders. With her statement, and also the evidence found by the family, Detective Inspector Miller and his team were keen to turn the investigation around.
Mick Ainsley, Sergeant Jones, myself, Taff Jones were in an office at Whitton Police Station. We related of what we'd got from Julie Mugford, and Mike Ainsley went round the circle of us. Said, right, what do you think? Taff said, I'm sticking with what I've always said, that she's committed the murders and shot herself. He said to Stan Jones, what do you think? He said, well, I think Jeremy's done it. And he said to me, what do you think? And I said, well, this witness seems very plausible. As far as I was concerned, there was enough evidence to bring in and charge with the murders Jeremy Bamber at that point.
Officers believed Bamber could have entered the farmhouse through a small downstairs window, then travelled back to his cottage in nearby Goldhanger before alerting police.
There's a seawall from Goldhanger around to the farm. I think a bicycle ride to and from the scene would never have been seen in a million years. Certainly wouldn't take a car. Car headlights could have been seen coming around the village.
By now, police felt the evidence against Bamber was mounting. During their investigations, he had left the country with a friend for a holiday. In his absence, police were also told that some flecks on the silencer had originated from the mantel, confirming the family's theory that a violent struggle had taken place. On Bamber's return to the UK, officers were waiting to arrest him. Jeremy Bamber was interviewed and charged with 5 counts of murder on the 29th of September 1985. He vehemently denied any involvement in his family's tragic deaths, stating he was at home when his father called, and that Julie Mugford had an axe to grind, having finished their relationship shortly after the murders. But Essex police had their evidence. Just over a year later, Bamber's high-profile court case began.
Jeremy Bamber, the brother of model Sheila Caffell, has appeared in court charged with the murder of his parents, his sister and her twin sons. Mr. Bamber denied all the charges.
Mr. Bamber, is it true that your sister...
The big moment was when he came into court.
Indeed.
My recollection of him standing there being very polite, very attentive, not humble, but trying to portray this image of someone who was quite nice, charming, decent fellow.
The key moment in the trial was Julia Mugford's testimony.
Miss Mugford, why did it take you 6 weeks?
Because the jury had to decide who was telling the truth, Julia or Jeremy.
Didn't show much emotion. At times he seemed still a little bit amused by the proceedings. I suspect he really thought he was going to get off.
Not for me to defend. No further questions, Your Honour?
The silencer evidence, yes, there it was. But that didn't have quite the emotional pull, emotional influence that seeing this young girl in the dock and having to adjudicate on her truth.
Is it true, Miss Mugford, that your former boyfriend, Jeremy Bamber, told you of his desire to kill his family? Please tell the court about the events of the night of the murders.
It was like nothing I've ever experienced. There was a buzz, you could feel it in your stomach. You know, the court was packed packed with journalists, packed with spectators. It was probably the most memorable day of my journalistic career.
I therefore put it to you, Mr. Bamber, that it was you who killed
Jeremy
your family
Bamber's
on a
trial
tragic
lasted
night at White
19
House Farm.
days. In summing up, the judge outlined key points for the jury to consider.
As part of his defence, recalled or had read to you evidence to show that Sheila was mentally ill and argued that in her conduct in killing her family, it is entirely consistent with that illness. The red paint on the knurled end and the mark on the knurled end of the mantelpiece show that on that fact alone, that the silencer was on the gun during the fight in the kitchen.
Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?
Yes, Your Honour, we have.
The jury, by 10-2 majority, decided that he'd committed all the murders. And he was sentenced to 5 life sentences.
Jeremy Bamber, the man who killed his family in order to inherit a fortune, has been sent to jail for at least 25 years.
Justice Drake was the presiding judge and said you will serve a minimum of 25 years. You're a warped individual.
You are evil beyond belief. Officers, take him away.
As Bamber faced the rest of his life in prison, the scale and magnitude of this sensational case played out in a press frenzy. Despite the passing of time, this extraordinary crime rarely leaves the headlines for long. And now, over 20 years on, documentation from the investigation has come to light. New evidence that puts a twist on this heinous crime once more. Here, for the first time, we study the contents. On the morning of the tragedy, Jeremy Bamber was adamant there was movement within the farm.
About, 2 minutes past 4 off the house, something strange happened. Jeremy says they saw movement, a figure, a person moving in an upstairs room. They ran away, and certainly other police records confirm that they did run away.
In addition to this, police telephone logs from the evening state officers were in conversation with somebody inside the farm at 5:25 a.m. Armed response waited to enter the house until 7:37, over 4 hours after police arrived at the scene, and more than 2 hours after the conversation log.
7:37, they reported that in the kitchen were 2 dead bodies, 1 male, 1 female. That same message was picked up and recorded by 2 other sources.
After discovering 2 bodies in the kitchen, all but one of the armed officers searched the rest of the house.
At 10 minutes past 8, they radioed 3 more bodies found upstairs.
So initial inspection of the property reported 2 bodies downstairs and 3 upstairs. Yet by the time of Jeremy Bamber's trial, that had changed.
The entire scene of crime presentation at Jeremy's trial and in witness statements should be there were 4 bodies upstairs. That's what they said. Something very strange had gone on. Dead bodies don't move.
Five members of an affluent family have been brutally murdered in Essex. Police originally believed the daughter, Sheila Caffel, who suffered with mental illness, had killed her family and then herself. But in one of the most sensational twists in criminal history, the surviving relative, Jeremy Bamber, has been found guilty of the crime. Continually protesting his innocence, Bamber has spent over 25 years appealing his conviction. Now, vital documents from the investigation have surfaced after years of appealing by Bamber and his legal team. They reveal alarming contradictions in the case. One issue under scrutiny are differing accounts on the location of the bodies.
The question arises, as to where those bodies were, because we have all this evidence that 2 bodies were downstairs and 3 upstairs, whereas the scene of crime evidence report in Jeremy's trial and many other times was that 4 were found upstairs.
We have 2 dead females from bedroom. There are 2 young boys in here.
Theories suggest that as the team of 6 armed officers moved through the house, something unexpected happened.
There was a commotion, and one of the police officers, in his witness statement, refers to that. And his interpretation, or his explanation, is there was movement upstairs.
What were the noises mentioned in the statement? The document goes on to suggest it could have been movement from another officer, but by the time other police attended the scene, 4 bodies, not 3, were upstairs. The prosecution in the trial was resolute. Neville Bamber was discovered in the kitchen, the twins in their beds, and June and Sheila in the main bedroom upstairs. Some theories suggest Sheila moved from the kitchen up to the bedroom via one of the farm's 3 staircases, whilst the police were searching other areas of the house, having only injured herself with the first gunshot wound. Forensic photographs taken around 10 a.m. show Sheila's blood was still running from her wounds. 2 statements also say this. Added to that, her body did not have livor mortis, suggesting she had not been dead for a long period of time. The prosecution claimed she would have died by 3:30 a.m., 6.5 hours earlier. Jeremy had been outside with police since 3:45 that morning.
Something had gone wrong. Why were the accounts so different?
Further documents suggest the extended family found the silencer in the gun cupboard at a different time than originally thought.
We find record of David Bouffleur giving a silencer to the police on 11th of September. And the record in that particular log includes the statement that he said he'd found it in the cupboard.
But other statements show a silencer was discovered almost a month earlier, on the 10th of August.
The problem is, how and why did the second silencer appear? Because the prosecution case was so simple. There could only have been one. That's what they said. It's one they claim Sheila could not have shot herself with if it was on the end of a rifle. But now we have, looking at September, a second silencer.
So 2 documents show a silencer was collected on the 11th of September, but other family statements contradict these, saying one was found over a month earlier, on the 10th of August. Which account is true? Were 2 silencers in fact found? There are 2 differing dates of discovery and 2 reference numbers given by police. Yet only one silencer was ever discussed at Jeremy's trial.
Now, don't ask me what all this means. It does mean the reality is not what was produced at Jeremy's trial and helped secure his conviction.
Records also reveal officers searched the gun cupboard shortly after the murders.
The police had looked. They had carried out very thorough investigations, and they had not found these items.
A main element of the prosecution was that a silencer must have been on the murder weapon on the night of the killings. But Jeremy Bamber has always stated that this could not have been the case. From letters he has written during his appeal campaign, he believes there was never such a device on the gun. A .22 rifle is a low-caliber gun. Bamber also explains that even without a silencer, these make less noise when fired than other higher-caliber weapons. At trial, the jury was told that a silencer had been attached to the murder weapon. making it impossible for Jeremy's sister to have taken her own life.
As for the issue of the silencer, Jeremy's defence team have conducted experiments. Prosecution alleged that Sheila's arms were too short and the gun plus silencer too long for her to have committed suicide. We now know that is not the case. We have the evidence, and you can show it.
The silencer sound moderator debate continues. It did form a large part of the trial in relation to the scratch discovered on the mantel.
The prosecution made a great play on the evidence of the scratch mark and how it implicated Jeremy Bamber in the murders that took place in the farmhouse.
Now Peter Southurst, a photographic expert, has been given access to the crime scene images to analyse.
On the original scene of crime pictures taken on the day of the incident, the police photographer had not actually picked up that there was a scratch on the mantelpiece at all. The relatives of Jeremy Bamber had told the police that they discovered this mark. The scratch mark itself was quite deep and would have produced a fair quantity of wood and paint which would have dropped onto the carpet if it had been there. So there's no sign of any debris at all in an area which I'd expect to see debris.
Mr. Southurst has also made a startling discovery as to when the scratch mark was actually made.
I was able to demonstrate using life-size pictures that the marks underneath the mantelpiece that I would have expected to see were not there, and therefore the scratch had been put there after the original scene of crime photograph had been taken. If we say that the scratch marks didn't appear on the original scene of crime and therefore the silencer was not implicated in that, we can take the silencer out of the case altogether, and that alters the entire complexion of it.
If the scratch was not on the mantel at the time of the murders, a large part of Jeremy Bamber's trial is flawed. The theory was that a violent struggle had taken place in the kitchen between Jeremy and his father, the silencer scratching the mantel in the process. The prosecution stated Sheila could not have fought with Neville Bamber. He would have simply overpowered her. Yet Neville was sat down when he died.
Poor Neville eventually died sitting on a chair, leaning forward. There's nothing in that tragic, ghastly picture that demands or refutes Sheila who did the deed.
Also, the jury was told that the blood examined in the silencer was a mixture of human and animal, the human being Sheila's, with the presence of the enzyme AK1. Supporting the argument she could not have killed herself, then placed the device back in the gun cupboard.
The blood that was found in the silencer, which allegedly was found in the gun cupboard 2 or 3 days after, had some blood deposit in it. They are totally inconclusive. There is no absolute forensic evidence the silencer was used at all.
The enzyme AK1 found by the forensic expert on the silencer and attributed to Sheila Cathell can in fact be found in dozens of animals, including rabbits. This was never outlined in the trial. Prior to the tragedy, Jeremy Bamber said his parents were trying to reason with his sister, suggesting she received extra help with her twin boys.
Sheila wasn't really interested in any of the options. She didn't say a lot, and I didn't add a lot to the conversation while I was stood there. But we just didn't know how to reach out. With schizophrenia, it's really difficult, and our understanding of mental illness was very limited.
Much more should have been made of the fact that Sheila, the day before the killings, was showing every sign of heading for an episode of paranoid schizophrenia, and that her psychiatrist said, given any hint that she was an inadequate mother, she could flip it, and the defense didn't pursue that enough.
You're not only telling me that I need to foster my own children!
Statements from Sheila's psychiatrist reveal how he believed her mental state could have driven her to snap if faced with losing her children. Another crucial part of Jeremy Bamber's conviction was Julie Mugford's statement. She claimed Bamber had hired a hitman, but the man in question had a cast-iron alibi. Shortly after the murders, Jeremy had ended his relationship with Julie.
They had this enormous fallout. We're talking about the last week in August, if I recall correctly.
So hurt was Julie by the breakdown of their relationship, she admitted to officers that she tried to smother Jeremy with a pillow. It took 1 month after the murders for her to go to police with her story.
She said that she was in anguish and turmoil and distressed, but she appears to have acted a very ordinary life during August.
Bamber's account of that fateful evening has never changed. Along with his father's distressed call to him in the early hours, he maintains Neville would have also made a call to police himself. Only Jeremy's call was discussed at his trial. Now we're able to reveal this document. A phone call from Neville Bamber to police at 3:26 from White House Farm that states, "Daughter gone berserk," and "has got hold of one of my guns." The other log, 10 minutes later, is from Jeremy from his home in Goldhanger. Thousands of documents relating to the case have been placed under public interest immunity, never to be released by the police. Many articles have also been destroyed. Whatever the exact events were on the 7th of August 1985, a whole family was brutally murdered, and their remaining family has the grief to bear.
We there have presented to us a scenario wholly incompatible with the scene of crime evidence presented at Jeremy's trial. And what we are now absolutely certain of is that Jeremy's conviction is not only unsustainable, but it is wrong, that Jeremy Bamber is an innocent man.
I'm absolutely convinced, unequivocally, right man is behind bars.
The thought of those two little 6-year-olds, their lives just starting, being shot in such a calculating and terrible way, it's still upsetting now.
Shortly after the massacre, Neville and June's extended family inherited the Bamber estate, and the Eatons moved into White House Farm. The family stand by the original conviction and continue to make their voices heard in the media.
Why is that? Because no one wins. We all lose. Can't bring them back.
Jeremy Bamber has appealed his conviction since 1986, so far to no avail. He is one of only 35 prisoners in the UK to be given a whole life tariff. At present, he will die behind bars.